spot today with oil well rights, how to retain them when you flip property. So we're just going to let some other people come in first, get some people into the group. So we are streaming at our Facebook group, Land Mogul. And we're just going to wait a few more minutes. So while we're doing that, I'm trying to see who all is here today. Okay. So we've got Ken Lewis. Hi, good to have you with us today. And we've got more people coming on. So we're going to start in just a second. Um, hey, Patrick, good to see you too. Rich, good to see you as well. We've got some other people coming in as well. Steve, good to see you here. Luke. All right, so let's get into the subject. So let me first I'll cover why we would want to do this and kind of what is the situation surrounding oil well rights, gas rights to property. Well, I've been flipping land for, well, almost my whole life now. And it is something that I started to discover a few years ago. So before that, I really wasn't paying attention to it. But when I started, just the sheer numbers of deals I started flipping when I got into the land side was just mind boggling. And what happened is I started to say, well, wait a minute. I want to be able to pick up everything on the table. So I don't want to leave anything on the table. I don't want to give away stuff. So when I started looking at the stack of deeds I was accumulating, all of those deeds were basically conveying to the next person all the oil and gas rights in that property. So that's known as the mineral rights. And it also goes by the term subsurface rights. So you have surface rights, which is your top of the land, and water rights. So it goes down and hits the water. So that's typically what's being conveyed um, from the surface rights. And then subsurface rights are anything further down under the ground, which is really where we come up with the oil rights and the gas rights. So I was leaving these, this asset basically on the table and shoving it over to the other party, and really for no reason, because most people that we're buying for, in fact, almost everybody that we buy from, they're not really looking to buy the mineral rights. They're not out looking to put a gas well or an oil well on the property. They want to live there, and that's why they're buying this property. Well, from that perspective, if that's not a concern to them, then it's something, the oil rights, then gas rights, is something I can retain, something you can retain. So when we're doing these flips, I want you to be thinking now that this is some asset that you're able to retain, and maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. Sort of like playing the lottery. All right, I'm gonna suggest that most of the time it's not going to work out, but why take the chance? In that one chance where it actually strikes, you could have retained the oil and gas rights for zero cost just by adding one more document into the process, which would cost you all of maybe less than $20 to do the entire transaction to retain those oil and gas rights. So why wouldn't you? Now, there's some reasons why you wouldn't, and there's some reasons why you would. And but before I get into some of those reasons, one of the things I want to say is what we're doing here is something that people do. I mean, this is what's been done forever. I happen to be in Texas, and we have a lot of oil rights, and those rights have oftentimes been retained before. They've been sold before, and so when we're buying property here, we buy it without those rights. We know we're not getting it. I'm going to say most of the property that you see sold, they're coming in without those rights, and so that just kind of goes with being in a oil-rich state. Now, more and more states are finding oil, and with the development of technology, more and more ways of finding oil where there wasn't really enough oil to go after before is now becoming, possible. So really, no matter where you live right now, think about retaining these mineral rights. In particular, if you're in a state or you're flipping property in a state like this that has so many oil wells out there, and we're going to take a look in a second and see just how many there are. But that's basically what I wanted to cover with you today. How do we take those rights out and then pass along the property, which is really what we're after. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and jump over to I'm going to first jump over to a deed of record. So the first thing that we want to do when we're looking at a property is find out, first of all, do we have rights? The person we're buying it from may have the rights and may not have the rights. So how do we find that out? All right, so let's jump in here. This is a local deal I'm doing right now. I'm in the middle of it. And as I was pulling this yesterday, as I was pulling up her information, because I just got her contract back yesterday. And so at this point, I went in there to start investigating everything. And when I put her name in there, immediately I saw oil and gas lease, which I don't usually see, but that means that there actively was, at least was at some point in 1980, a lease that was in effect for this person. And so what this means is when she bought the property in 1977, she had the oil and mineral rights to this property. And then the Stuart Sherrick came along and leased those rights from her. And they may or may not pulled oil. Oil lease just means that they have the right to lease the property for a set amount of years and do some, maybe they can put a well on there or not. Just depends on if they decide to pull the trigger and dig for oil. Subsequently, there was one more deed here. This is not really too much of a consequence because she just put everything into a trust just to make it simple. So these are the two documents that we really are looking at having to deal with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll pull up this document here. And this was the original deed. And this is typically what you're going to see. So the deed just basically conveys the property, and it also is going to it's also going to convey any mineral rights or deeds unless they've been stripped out. And usually you'll see that just a reference to it because it's a normal paragraph in most deeds where it's right below the legal description itself. It will say that, well, we're going to convey all these rights except for or subject to any oil rights or mineral rights which may have been retained. And that's not even saying they've been retained. It's just saying that if they have been, then and they were sold off or they were leased out, then you don't get this. So in a way, every deed kind of sets itself up saying, hey, we're not going to go check out whether you're getting the oil rights or not. We're just going to say if they've already been sold off before, then you're not getting them. And this is typically what every deed has in it, and how almost every deed you're going to pull up has this as a natural thing. So again, that's because people aren't trying to buy leases, and they're not trying to buy oil and gas rights. So they just cover themselves as a default in this area right here. Now, you could go back further by finding this Woodlands tract and doing an investigation on that. In other words, you could pull up their ownership of this subdivision and find out if they were given the oil and gas rights or if they were retained before them, and you just have to kind of go back and forth if you want to do that. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm not even saying to do that. You don't have to. To me, it's kind of a waste of time when you... Sometimes it's obvious, right here it's obvious because we know she has the oil and gas rights because she leased them out to somebody. So I'm just going to assume at this point that she has the mineral rights, and then I'm going to take a look at this lease right here. So the lease is saying that, and by the way, this is called an oil, gas, and mineral lease. It's very common, and it's pretty much what you'll see every time you find one of these leases that have been done. And mainly what we're looking for here is um, this area that one, we just want to make sure how long this lease was in effect. And here, a few paragraphs down below the legal, it's generally written in there. It kind of stands out a lot of times, but just look for any blanks. So just look at the blanks. And so what this says is that this lease will be in force for a period of 5 years, and then it will basically die unless they discovered oil, and then an operation was started, and then the operation continues because it says that all right here. And as long as that operation, they're in other words, they're pulling oil or gas out of this property, as long as it doesn't stop for 90 consecutive days, then they can retain this lease. So they could go way past 5 years. Now, the typical gas or oil well around here in most places will last sometimes up to 35 years. They're pumping oil or gas out of it, sometimes longer. I've got one right now that's been going almost my whole life. So it's the extensions are amazing sometimes. It just depends on how much gas and oil that's down there. But in this case, this was done. This lease was done, and then a well was drilled. Now, subsequently, and I'm going to show you how you can now start to kind of figure out, what are your odds that there's more oil there, or maybe this company is still in operation on it. How do you find that out without having to do like a ton of research? Well, I'm going to close this because we can go to in our state. It's called the Texas Railroad Commission. They have a website that actually has a map that shows you if there's an oil or gas well on this property. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go find out where this property is, right? So when we're doing our research, we find out, oh, well, here's the property. And I'm going to go in here again to find this property on a map. So really, I'm just needing to find a map, and I'm using the county GIS map. So your county appraisal district will have a map like this, and it's going to show you where this property is located. So now I can see on this map where the property is, and then I'm going to go look at the Texas Railroad Commissioner's gas and oil well map and see if there's any oil wells in this area. That way I can see what is the potential one of that lease still being active, or maybe if there was no lease there, we didn't find any lease, what are my odds that maybe they are looking for or will look for oil or gas in this area? So for that, we can do a Google search for oil gas GIS map, and then the state name, if no matter what state you're in, and you're looking for a GIS map that will have the layout or layers on top of the map showing you where all the oil wells and stuff are. So in this case, I just went to the Railroad Commissioner's GIS map and found this map, and I've used this map for years. They've had it for years, so I'm sure there's a lot out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into where this particular property is, and then we're just going to find it with just using the geography and the road system. So already I can see there's a lot of oil wells. Every one of these red dots is an oil well. So we're obviously in a very rich oil area here, as you will find almost everywhere. When you're not looking at this kind of a map, you have no idea how many oil wells are out there. And in this case, this is the area right here. So there's my little lake, here's my little subdivision, and right there is the road. There's the name of the road. And I can come in here a little bit more now and start to see what's going on. So I'm just going to give you a very quick understanding. Over here, of course, is the ledger, And this is really all you need. You don't need to become an oil expert. We're not going that far. But basically, at these top are the most important that really will describe what we're talking about here. So a round red circle is going to be oil. The little circle with a star around it that's not filled in is a gas well, and then you have a combination oil and gas well, so it's filled in and it's got the little starburst on it. Now we also have important. This is very important. Plugged oil wells. That's the dot with just one straight line through it, saying no, no, this is not. This was plugged. So they dug it. Maybe they produced oil. And at some point they went dry, and then they plugged it. All right. Then you have a plugged gas well, the same thing. You have also you're going to have a signification when you come over here and just put your mouse over this button. This will tell us this was a plugged oil well. So in this area, there is oil, and they dug a horizontal. I think this is a directional well, meaning they just went down. They just went sideways down, hoping to hit oil somewhere along a different strata somewhere in here, and they are able then to draw out oil, which they did, and they were able to pump oil out. And maybe that was part of where that one time they paid her some royalties from it. Because when they do these things, they divide up however they want to pay out. And your well can be right here, but your property is over here, and you're still going to get paid. Now there's another one over here. This is also a plugged well, and that's K in operating, and this one was K in operating. So this was the same company that bought this little oil patch in here, and that they would be the one that would either still be operating it or not operating it. So I'm going to assume right now they're plugged, they're gone, they've moved on. So why is this still important? Why would this still be important to us? Because now that we have fracking opened up. It's a new technology that opened up the ability for even small operations. We're talking about somebody with $100,000. They can come in here, lease this property again, or go lease this well, and go down into this well and frack it and start producing oil and or gas again. That's why it's important. So each time we have an advancement in technology, it's probably going to, again, obviously produce or be able to take things that were old and outdated and bring them back to life, or pick up more minerals or whatever. We don't know what the future holds. But when you retain the mineral rights, you're doing that forever. It's until you get rid of them at some point. That means if we take those mineral rights out of a property and hold on to them, even when we pass away, it passes naturally to our heirs and their heirs and their heirs. It's just always going to be there. So again, why wouldn't you want that situation? Even if right now maybe you're sitting on something where they're actually producing oil now, so you're out of it. All right, so it's, well, actually, if this was going on, you wouldn't be getting the oil rights. Those already be gone. So it works obviously when a well has been dried, and they stop making payments, because the person selling you the well, they don't care about it anymore. They've already gotten paid out, and they know the well's capped, and they're moving on with their life. So that's basically that. Or there was never any oil produced at all anyway, and there was never experiments done on the area. Right now it's completely dry. Maybe the closest oil well is 10 miles away or 20 miles away. But look at this place. This is a kind of don't want to go too far out, they'll all disappear. But this gives you an idea of the what an oil patch looks like, right? So an oil patch will extend for miles and miles, and it can go in different directions, and it will just basically populate. Now these are almost all horizontal wells that are being done here. So these are just vast numbers. This is not that far from Houston. But this is really something that you'll see all over the state. So either you're in an oil patch or you're not in an oil patch. But to look at this from Google or something, you may not even see any of these. These are all, so most of these, there's live wells here. We can see, so here's a natural gas well. Here's one though that's been plugged. So you got live wells, you've got wells that are played out. Most of these are live. There's some plugged wells in there, but this is the way it is all over Texas. So that's right here. If you get up into the Midland, Odessa area, and some of you have heard about Midland, Odessa, but again, wherever you're buying or flipping land, you can come to this map and start looking at how many wells are there, where are the wells located, where where do they run out of oil, for example. And again, none of that really makes any difference for us because we're not trying to drill for oil right now. We're just looking to retain rights, because what happens is at some point the oil people will come to you, or they'll come to your heirs if it hasn't happened in your lifetime. And at that point, somebody can become very rich very quickly, because those first few years, those first 2 or 3 years, that's when almost, well, I don't want to say all of it, but so much of the oil is actually produced in those first couple of years. And that's really where you want to be in the game anyway. So this is a natural setup for that kind of a thing. Now let's take a look at the sheer number of wells up in Midland. When you play around with these maps, it's just incredible. I mean, this goes on for it goes on forever when you're looking at the state of Texas and how many oil wells they have drilled. And these are major operations. Every single one of these was a major operation. And this goes over vast stretches of our state, all the way south, all the way to the very southern part of our state, and all the way to the north, all the way up through New Mexico. It keeps going through New Mexico, up through Colorado, Wyoming. I mean, this is where just a large oil patch that goes on forever exists. All right, so let's take a look now at what we're trying to do in picking these properties up. I'm going to go to I'm going to go now to the way we pick up, or how do we strip these rights out. We've looked at it and we've seen if they're there, they're automatically being conveyed. That means at some point you can strip out those rights. So that now that we know that that's how the game is done, right? Well, all you need to do is come in and pull those rights out before you flip it. So you're taking in property. So you're taking a deed from the seller that's selling you the property. And what you want to do before you flip it or before you sell it to the next person, you just have to slide in there. And technically it can be done in 5 seconds, even if you're doing a back-to-back close like we do. You just need to slide another deed in there, conveying the mineral rights only to somebody else. So that could be your parents, your son, whoever. Ideally, it's somebody in your family, because the odds of them finding oil, that's not that great in your generation, or in the current generation, but maybe in the future. But again, you never know. It does happen. And I've gotten one of those letters one time already. So what they'll do is the oil drilling company will send you a letter saying, we'd like to pay you a little bit of money right here so we can come on your property or go near your property and test to see if there's any oil. And they'll give you some small sum, and that's okay. Then at that point they test for it. Then if they hit oil, or they find they have oil, then they'll send out what they call a landman. The landman is a person who will negotiate with you and get you the oil rights that you're supposed to have for those for your property. Now you're going into, for example, that lease that we saw earlier. And that way you're getting paid a royalty when they finally hit oil, or if they hit oil. But if they don't hit oil, you're not getting anything. So they do give you some upfront money, which can be thousands of dollars, just to give the right to them for that lease that we saw earlier. And that gives them the right to come on your property and actually drill. Again, this doesn't mean they have to come on your property and drill. They could be drilling up the street on somebody else's property, but you're still going to get your oil rights and your oil royalty check. So in a mineral deed, this is basically just conveying part of what we normally convey in a regular warranty deed. In a regular warranty deed, we're conveying all rights to that property. So if you wanted to retain some rights, you should pull them out before you convey. Technically, you can retain the rights by pulling them out in that deed, but I'm not going to advise that you would do something like that. But I would say that it's cleaner to show a very clean pulling of those deeds out, selling them to a different party. That party can be anybody. It could be your LLC. It could be a family member, as I said. It could be a trust, like a living trust that you create. So as long as that's been pulled out, then you're okay. Now, the legal description to the land goes here. So this is not something we need to know a tremendous amount about legalese here. This is very similar to a regular deed, except because we also have, we have the legal description of the actual property in this area right here. But all this basic boilerplate information down here will just retain the rights. Now I'm going to do this. Oh, and by the way, so once you do this, all you really need to do is to sign this before a notary, and then you'll file this back into your deed of record. So everything that we're doing is always coming back to the deed of records, where we were able to go and find the property, the warranty deeds to begin with. So whatever the legal description on this this particular property is, which was right here, this right here, lot 200 in the map records of Burleson County. So that's all basically the same legal description that you would put right here in the deed. So that's the main thing that changed. Obviously, the parties change up here, but pretty much everything else is going to stay the same. Now, you can go on to online places, like Legal Docs or whatever, USA, whoever sells Legal Docs, and they all will have a mineral deed for whatever state you're looking to do this in. But all you're needing to do, again, technically, is have this deed filled out, and then you file this with the county clerk's office. And that's being done before the final deed, where you're selling the property to somebody else, when that occurs. So let's take two scenarios. One, we'll look at it when you're just doing it yourself and you're handling all the deeds, because we're dealing with a little piece of cheap property here that we flip all the time, and we just do everything. We don't even bring a title company into it most of the time. And then we'll look at, well, what happens if you are doing a title company? How should you do all of this with a title company involved? Okay, well, the first thing is and it's just real quick. If we're self-funding something and we're self-closing it ourselves, then that's very simple. Now we are in total control. All we do, again, we're just going to have all of our deeds lined up, and when we go down to the county clerk, we're just handing them in. We're handing in the first deed for filing, which is where we bought it from our seller. We're handing in the second deed where we have sold off the rights. Then we hand in the third deed, and you're doing this all at one time, but they're filing them in this order. And so this last deed you're showing is where you sold it to your end buyer. So that's the setup on that. If you're going to go through a title company, what you're going to need to do is make sure that the title closer that you're working with is aware that you have removed the title, that you have removed the rights, the mineral rights to the property already, and doing one of two things. One, you can file this on your own long before it gets to closing. All right, so now you've basically taken the rights even before you get there. But if you're doing a double close, sometimes this is better if you just hand it in. And so you take this deed, you go notarize it, and then you hand it in along with your contracts that you're putting your deal together. So this is just one more contract that you're handing in. so that the title company then will be in charge of filing this in connection, and they'll do all the separation and filing in the proper stack order, etc. So that's just another quick way of doing it. Now, the other thing is you can go to a lawyer and have a lawyer write up your deed for you, and then they basically hand the deed into your title company for you. So those are the variations of how you can do this, and that's pretty much it. I mean, this is there's not a whole lot to being able to just pulling the rights out and holding them now in your estate for multiple estates. And if you use a living trust, which I show you how to create a living trust in my book, Living Trust for Real Estate Investors. You can get, and that's available at johnalexander.com. But you can set up a living trust and hold all of your mineral rights. That way, when you do pass away, it's automatically going to go to the beneficiaries in there. You don't really have to probate the will, etc. in some states if you use a living trust. Actually, in most states. So that's an ideal way of holding them and passing them without incurring a lot of issues in probate, etc. So with that, I'm finished. I will open it up to some questions. If you have any questions, I'll go through them right now. And by the way, I'm going to share this link with you. That way you can have a copy of this for your records. And let me go ahead and grab this link. And I'm going to put the link in Facebook right below somewhere here. So I'll just come back in and click that. Mineral rights deed. So look for that link in there, and you can grab a copy of that, and you can save it, or you can reload it up into your into your own docs, or however you want to do it. So it's pretty easy to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump out. We'll take questions now, if we have any. Hopefully we will see what we have. We have a what website is that? I think the website you're referring to is probably the Texas Railroad Commissioner's website. If you go there, you'll find that they have a GIS map, and it's actually easier to find just doing a Google search. So if you're in Texas, you can search Texas Railroad Commission GIS map oil if you want to, and that will bring it up. Would this also cover some future discovery? Yes. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're trying to, just cover whatever they find now or really in the future. But even if they came on the property tomorrow, they're going to find it now, and you're the winner. I've got one coming up with mineral rights. Great. I mean, literally most of the land that you do buy, depending on, again, where it's at, but so many of them do come just by default with the oil rights. And then if you're in an area like what we're just looking at, then sometimes you don't. So again, it just depends. If they are not actively operating, those rights go back to the owner. And when they sell that property, unless they specifically sold the mineral rights, which most people don't, then you get those mineral rights. That's why you'll pick up mineral rights on most properties, except when they've been stripped out and sold to a different company. And again, that's kind of rare. Let's go in. Any other questions? What kind of potential profit if they decide to rent from you? Well, oftentimes they'll rent your property at anywhere. Well, it's all over the place, depending on, the landman and the people that he represents or she represents. So they'll pay X amount to lease that land, and it's thousands of dollars. I mean, it's not a couple $100. You're talking about thousands of dollars, and that renews every year. So they have to come back up with those thousands of dollars to pay you again. I mean, you're not going to make a million off of that. You can't make $1 million if they strike oil, though. That's for certain. I had a good friend of mine who I grew up with, and their family, they owned the property. They had about not that much, I guess about 60 acres. and they were dirt poor their entire life, and they struck oil on their property. And his first year, I think they paid him like $8 million. It was so much money, and money he'd never seen before, that he didn't even know how to spend it, and he didn't. He just put it in the bank, and the only thing he bought was a brand new pickup truck. But nothing else changed for that man. And but his family, that they're the big, well, they were the big beneficiaries of that. Let's go in. If the last deed has a boilerplate language excludes mineral rights, but you see no evidence of those rights being sold, can you acquire the mineral rights when you buy it? No, if it does specifically exclude the mineral rights, then you're not getting those mineral rights. And the way that courts have judged that here in Texas, from what I've seen, it just needs to be made clear in a deed that you're retaining your mineral rights, and then that's it. They did not pass. You were able to retain them. That's why that is another way of retaining them. But in my opinion, not as strong as selling those rights to, or conveying or gifting those rights to your another party while you technically have ownership of that property. Yes, the Beverly Hillbillies. I love it. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I did post this little deed right here. I'm also going to post, because some of you are asking for it, and this is Texas. I'm going to also post this in the Facebook group. This is the map that I'm using for the Texas. This is the oil map from the Railroad Commission of Texas. And that way you can kind of play around with it. When you see the number, you're just not going to believe the number of oil wells that have been drilled here. And even if you go down on Google, look down above on a Google map, say West Texas for sure, you'll see like massive numbers of these little white dots. Every one of those is an active well right now. But what you're not seeing is what's on this map. This is the historical map. Every well that's ever been drilled in Texas is on there. And they are just sometimes, they're just like next to each other, because that well dried up, then they re-drilled. It just goes on and on. It's crazy. So that is a lot to get through. If the sellers, okay, if it, is it possible to get the cliff notes from their Saturday night clubhouse meeting about doing deals in their current hot real estate market? I don't have cliff notes, but for sure you can, tune in again, because we cover, well, we cover kind of all kinds of stuff. But yeah, we just don't have cliff notes. So if somebody does have cliff notes, share them with me. That way we would have them available. So no way to verify you're getting a fair offer for your rights. Yeah, well, you can, when they start into an area where they start drilling, they're pretty much, they're making the same deal to everybody. But you should probably go to a lawyer at that point and have the lawyer do your negotiation for you. The lawyers are going to be the ones who can get you the best deal. You're not going to be able to negotiate the best deal yourself. You're talking about millions of dollars. You want to lawyer up very quickly. Okay, thank you, everybody. That seems to be the questions. We will see you back next time. We have the next topic that we'll cover and help you. We'll be obviously focusing more back on the flip. This is something that you can do while you're doing your flip, and it's the cost of filing a deed. Some places that's $11. Some places that's $25. And the great thing about this is you can retain this asset and not have any more expense connected to it. In other words, you're not going to have to pay taxes on a well that hasn't been developed out. So you can retain this ownership at a zero cost forever until they do discover it, if they discover it. So again, it's like winning the lottery, but it happens. It just happens, and so we want to retain that. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you back next time.